Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking all about storytelling because it is so important to building a community online and really developing a personal brand. So I have talked about this in a creator coaching vlog that I did with my client Erica, and I made her do a few practice rounds of storytelling because it is just that important. So in this video, I'm going to rehash a lot of the parts that I talk about in that video, but really explaining it thoroughly so that you understand how to tell a good story, because most people don't. So as usual, I am going to be getting ready, so let's just get right into it. As I've said before, storytelling is so essential to building a community, an online community that is locked into you and loves your content. I also touched on this in my how to build a cult following type of video, and it's your story that really keeps people just enveloped in you, like wanting more and wanting to know like what you're doing. And even if you've seen random videos online on like TikTok, let's say, like you may not necessarily remember that specific creator, but you remember their story. The first note that I want to make about storytelling is that your story must have a beginning, middle, and end. A lot of you don't do this. I'm just going to tell you right now, you don't do it. So if you think back to your like middle school language arts class, you probably did do some writing. I used to do picture prompts all the time. I love those. But your teacher probably told you that your story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, in my language arts classes, I actually did study a lot of elements to stories and different themes and things. Like I've gone into grave detail about how to tell stories, and I learned that in high school. But essentially, if you are missing one of the parts, your story sucks. It's just not going to be good. So if you think about any like sitcom that you watch, so a 30-minute show that you just turn on and it's like a comedy and it's just really something that's easygoing to watch. So I always think about Abbott Elementary. That's one of my favorite sitcoms to watch right now. But every episode they start with a beginning, right? So the beginnings may be different, but that is where you introduce the problem. So what a lot of people tend to do is they'll just say like, oh, so I was at blah, 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 blah. Well, it's really uninteresting for you to phrase it in that way. So what makes a beginning interesting is how you introduce details of the story. And again, a lot of people don't do this. It's something that takes a lot of practice to create a story that is actually interesting. But in the beginning, you're going to introduce the problem. What is it that people should hear about, right? Like, what is the problem that the main character, which is going to be you, because you're typically be telling stories about yourself. So what problem is the main character trying to solve, or what problem is the main character already currently in, right? That we're going to see play out in real time. Like, we just want to know, what is the problem? Get to it straight away. Don't introduce yourself. Don't tell us some random stuff. Tell us, what is the problem? Then the middle, you are going to give us the details, the nitty gritty, right? You're going to tell us what happened, essentially giving us a play-by-play, but you're only going to include relevant details. So an example of including irrelevant details will be something like, let's say I'm telling a story about myself going skiing, and then I say, yeah, I put on a pair of red snow boots. Now, if I never introduce or talk about those red snow boots ever again, then the purpose of those red snow boots is irrelevant, because if I never loop the red snow boots twice back into the stories. But if I say, oh, I put on my red snow boots to go out to the slopes, and when I came back after my ski day, I noticed that there were two pairs of red snow boots and I didn't know which one was mine. That is a relevant detail, because I introduced the snow boots in the beginning. I said, hey, I put on my favorite red snow boots. And then near like the end, or I guess like near the end of the middle or beginning end, I said, I couldn't figure out which one were my snow boots because they were, the same pairs of boots. That is an example of relevant details. So if you know you are someone who just says random details that don't have anything to do with the story, this is something you really need to practice, because a lot of people tend to do that, or they undershare details, especially online, because they're like, oh, they're either not important, or I don't want people to know this, or they just are unwilling to share certain parts. You can keep part of your story private. You can leave out some details that people may not need to know. However, with storytelling, especially online when building an audience, there is going to be a level of vulnerability that you need to have. Like, there's just no getting around it. So if you're not willing to be vulnerable in your story, then there's really no point in you even telling the story. Like, who cares, right? So moving on to the end of your story, this is where you wrap it up all together, right? So this is where the main character solves the problem or finds a solution or realizes that there's a new problem. So if we're thinking about an episode of Abbott Elementary, they introduce the problem in the beginning, right? The characters go through all this stuff. There's some comic relief in there. There's some jokes. There's some lessons. There's a few problems that probably pop up alongside the main problem. But then by the end of the episode, the problem is solved, right? People may get in an argument in the middle, and then by the end of the episode, they make up, or they resolve the problem in some way, or they find out a solution to said problem. That is what you need to have in your story. So you need to connect the end of your story very back to the beginning. So if I'm using this snow story, this ski trip story as an example, let's say in the beginning I said, it's my first ski of the season. I am so excited to be going to Lake Tahoe and getting back out on the slopes, but it is my first time going to Lake Tahoe, right? That's the beginning of the story. Then I say, day one, I got dressed, I wore my red snow boots, and by the time I was done skiing for the day, I went to where I stored my snow boots, and there were 2 pairs of red snow boots. So I tried to figure out which one was mine, but I just made my best guess, and I put on a pair of red snow boots. So later on that evening, I went to dinner, and I ran into the girl who happened to be wearing that red pair of snow boots. And she came up to me and said, "Oh my gosh, I think you grabbed the wrong pair of snow boots. Those are actually mine." And then I said to her, "Well, how do you know? Like, they look exactly the same. How do you know they're your snow boots and not mine?" And she says, "Oh, well, I made like a black mark on the bottom of my left foot snow boot because I knew that these were, a popular brand that people were going to buy and enjoy this season." Right. So then I look under my left foot and I see that black mark and I realize like, oh, actually, it was her pair of snow boots that I was wearing, and we ended up switching back. So we switched our snow boots back, and I felt really embarrassed, but she didn't think it was that big of a deal, and she actually invited me to go skiing with her and her friend the next day, which was so cool because she's really familiar with Lake Tahoe and she skis there all the time. So she was going to show me around the village in the area. In the end, I had a really great trip at Lake Tahoe because I got to make a new friend, even though I made an accident, and I did learn more about Lake Tahoe, and I definitely want to go back in the future. So in that story, although it wasn't like the most exciting, right? I just made it up off the top of my head. But in that story, I tied the end back to the beginning, because in the beginning I had said, this is my first time at Lake Tahoe. I don't really know what to expect, but I'm going to go skiing anyway. And then throughout the story, I do go skiing, but I end up meeting a friend or making a friend in a very abstract way because we ended up switching snow boots. So although there weren't any vulnerable parts of that story, you definitely want to include interesting facts or interesting or relatable details, which is my next point. Your story should include relatable details that are memorable for your audience. So talking about your thoughts, feelings, and emotions is something that is incredibly relatable regardless of who you are as a human being, because everyone as a human being experiences emotions at some point in their life. Like, everyone has an emotion. Whether or not you want to admit it, you do have emotions and you do feel them. It may not be at the exact moment, it may be delayed. It doesn't really matter. Every single human has thoughts, feelings, and emotions. So the cheat code to incorporating memorable details in your story is including thoughts, feelings, and emotions, because everybody has them. So when you practice this skill, you need to include those memorable details because it's what actually connects you to your audience. You have to remember that you have no idea who is watching your content. And they also are probably seeing you for the first time. If not, they may not even know your story, right? But by you telling them those memorable details that they can relate to, it just makes them want to connect to you and keep following you for whatever content that it is you're making. So if you're making, let's say, plus size fashion content and you create videos about different outfits that you can wear, a really great detail in that story is describing how you felt when you were younger looking for outfits. Maybe shopping was difficult, or maybe you just felt so free now that you can, find new clothes that you like, that fit your style, and that also fit you really well. So talking about your thoughts, feelings, emotions isn't really all that crazy. Like, if you were secure in who you are, it's not the craziest thing in the world to do. A lot of people shy away from it because they don't want other people to think that they have thoughts, feelings, emotions, but that's literally the one thing that we all share, regardless of your race, social, economic status, like where you live, any of that, your background. Everyone has thoughts, feelings, and emotions. So if you don't share them, it makes your story boring. Hence, in the story that I told about that made up ski story that I was just talking about, it was kind of boring because I didn't share any like juicy details. The juicy details is the memorable, relatable stuff that people want to know. Now, the main part though of what really makes a story stick, and a lot of people miss this, so pay attention. The main part of what makes a story stick is having a closing that states the take-home message and also ends in I would say a rhythmic or poetic type of way, right? If you say, oh, and then that was the end of the story, that's a really terrible way to end a story. Like, that's not how you generally speak when you are having a conversation. So when you are practicing your storytelling, practice it as if you were talking to a friend on FaceTime. Like, just talk to them about whatever it is that comes up. And pay attention to how you tell that story and the questions that they ask from listening to your story. If they are consistently asking you, okay, well, what happened to this? Okay, what happened to that? That means you were leaving out important details. You've probably included irrelevant details and instead you're leaving out important details. If they say, oh, well, what was, well, why did you tell me about this, right? Or what was the point of you telling me about that? That means you are telling them a lot of irrelevant details. So you have to have a healthy balance, or really you have to have a great balance of having relevant details in your story, and you have to close up all loose ends. If you've ever watched a Tyler Perry movie in the last, few years, then you've probably noticed that at the end of his stories, like at the end of the movie, you typically have a lot of questions that are unanswered. And that is an example of someone who doesn't really end a story properly. If you have no idea what happens to the main character, if you were confused about the ending in any sort of way, if there's just a lot of loose ends that haven't been tied up at the end of your story, you're creating a Tyler Perry movie, which, depending on whether or not you like his movies, I'm not a huge fan lately, I'll be honest. Depending on whether or not you like his movies will indicate to you where you fall on the storytelling scale. Every story has a resolution, right? That means you tie up the problem, you solve the problem, and then you have a denouement. Denouement is a French term to mean kind of like the aftermath. So if you ever watch a Christmas movie, right? They'll have like an ending, which is like, the couple always ends up together, like a Christmas rom-com. The couple always ends up together, and then they kind of like show the next few scenes of them continuing their life, or, having a family or moving to somewhere else, or maybe, they go to, I don't know, the dad's grave or something. Like, there's always something that's after the resolution that kind of just wraps up the movie in a nice, cute little bow, and it makes like a cute little like presentation. If you do not wrap up your movie, if you do not wrap up your story all nicely with a bow, right, and tell people that the take-home message of said movie or of your story, then essentially you were leaving them hanging, and people aren't going to want to listen to you or see a movie where they don't really know. Like, you are not creating a series of Star Wars where, at the end it's just a cliffhanger. You got to wait until the next Star Wars to come out. That's not what you're doing here. You're telling them a story in the video that they can connect to, that they can have a take-home message to, and that they can really relate to you from. If you leave them on a cliffhanger, they're not going to come back for more because they don't know you. You are totally brand new, or you have to assume that you are brand new to the people that you are reaching through your audience or through, posting your video. And you have to assume that people are seeing you for the very first time. If they're seeing you for the first time, they're not locked in to your sequel or, part 3, part 4. A lot of people aren't going to do that unless you are a very, very good storyteller. And I have talked about this person on the previous videos that I mentioned. So in the creator coaching vlog, where Reesa Teesa put out a 50-part series of her telling the story. And the reason why her series was so great is, one, the timing of the situation. So she put out I think 20 videos in a day. So it was like really easy for you to just go and binge. But also, she left every ending of each video, if you go back and watch the videos, at the end of every 10-minute video, she resolves the previous problem, but then she begins to introduce the next problem. So she says, we were looking at houses, and the real estate agent says, show us your proof of funds. And, he didn't show her the proof of funds at all. Like, he just wouldn't come up with it. And one day I actually went and confronted him. So him not showing the proof of funds wrapped up that searching for houses story, right? Like, they're no longer searching for houses because he can't indicate, or he can't show that they have the money for it. But then the next episode, so right before that episode ends, she introduces what she's going to talk about the next episode, which is what happened when she confronted him. There are very, very few people that can introduce multiple parts into a story and do it very, very well. She is definitely someone who does it very, very well. I would not recommend you start out with that. Start out with something very, very simple. You tell a story in a minute and 30 seconds, and you practice your storytelling skill with a friend or with someone on FaceTime so that you become more comfortable with speaking about yourself, your thoughts, feelings, emotions, before you even get to something where you can do a multiple part series or a multiple part story. A lot of people try to jump into that multi-part series, but they have no idea how to tell a story in the first place. And each part of their story is just really bad. It's told very poorly, where there isn't a beginning, middle, and end of that part of the story. And they also aren't introducing the new problem for the next episode. So it's a very advanced skill to be able to tell a story in multiple parts. So before you even get there, just practice telling your story in a short form video or in a one where you are sharing memorable details, an appropriate amount of details, and you're also having a full beginning, middle, and end. An indication that you've skipped over the middle is that people have no idea how you even got to the end. If someone says, well, wait, what happened in between here? That's because you skipped the middle. If you need help with this, like I said, go practice. You can always just watch a TV show, point out the beginning, middle, and end of the TV show, the different memorable details, how the problem was resolved in the end, and then like the denouement part of it. Every single story, regardless if it is a TV show, a movie, a documentary, whatever it is, there's always a beginning, middle, and end. And in a good, well-told story, there is a denouement where everything is wrapped up in a cute little bow and they send their audience on their way. So hopefully you guys enjoy this video and learned something from it. I really, really hope that you start to practice storytelling because it is so, so important with building a personal brand. I'm going to wrap it up. So if you like this video, let me know by giving it a thumbs up and I will see you in the next one. Bye.